stopped burying people, but King John still refused to allow Stephen Ling to take up the role. This resulted in the Pope excommunicating King John, which absolved all English subjects of their oath of allegiance to him, which caused him to lose all power over them. This blow to King John resulted in a revolt breaking out in the country, and the King of France used the chaos to challenge the rulership of England. With the upheaval, King John was forced to sign a very important charter called the Magna Carta, agreeing that the country would abide by many laws and justices, four of which are present to this day. These are the four clauses with no other choice. The French invasion in full swing. King John eventually accepted Stephen Law as the Archbishop of Canterbury. This decision led to the forces of the country abiding the king again, which allowed them to defeat the French armies on the coast of Flanders, located in Belgium. In 1265, King Henry III was incredibly against the citizens of the country having any say in the kingdom's rulership. The Earl of Leicester, Simon de Fort, thought differently and opposed the king, while the Magna Carta laid the groundwork for the prominent laws of the country. De Montfort created the first Parliament of England, electing people to speak on behalf of the average person. Just like today, the representatives of Parliament had their expenses paid. In 1298, taxation control was given to Parliament, bolstering the institution. One of the most devastating pandemics in British history was the Black Plague, which devastated the population in 1347. In fact, over 2,100 million people died from the viral disease throughout Europe in total, with 1.5 million of those coming from Britain. The initial English plague lasted 3 years, ending in 1350. With a disease popping back up multiple times in the 50 years that followed. For many years, it was believed that the plague was passed on by rats, but it's now believed to be an airborne disease that would kill those infected in just a few days. Peasants were affected the worst, as there were so many poor people living in close contact with each other. Due to the unprecedented volume of people dying, rotting corpses were left piled up in the street, with the primitive science of the day offering no cure or prevention for the plague. With peasant workers dropping from the disease, it became increasingly difficult to find people to tend to the fields and grow crops. This led to starvation and the decimation of entire villages. As they were desperately in demand, many peasant workers took advantage of the situation, moving around the country to find higher paid positions. The government didn't like the fact that peasants were now able to better themselves and chose to side with those willing to pay more. After trying to put a stop to them traveling to find higher paid jobs, the government tried to put a stop to it. This resulted in the Peasant Revolt of 1381, in which the poor folk of England violently banded together in order to get poll tax and the wage cap removed, as well as the abolishment of the control lords had over them and their property. Another huge event that happened in the Middle Ages was the War of the Roses, which saw the House of Lancaster and the House of York fight each other. Between 1455 and 1485, the reason for the war was that both sides were the descendants of a previous king, Edward III, and wanted to take their rightful place on the throne. The last significant battle of the Wars of the Roses, the Battle of Bosworth Field, saw one of the most famous kings in English history, Richard III, fall in battle. After this, Henry took the throne, who married Elizabeth of York and joined the two opposing houses of Lancaster and York. Together with the birth of the infamous Henry VII, Tudor period was ushered. Music in the Tudor period had a huge focus on the reshaping and a rethinking of religion, politics, and the monarchy in Britain. After defeating Richard III's army during the Battle of Bosworth in 1485, Henry VII rule saw the beginning of a 118-year reign for the Tudors, which saw a total of 5 monarchs sit upon the throne. In fact, the rulers of this period have become some of the most recognizable in English history. It was this rulership that played a huge part in shaping destiny to England and later the United Kingdom. Through the economic changes, the role changed for women and countrywide religious reform. The marriage between the two cousins brought the feud between the Lancasters and the Yorks together, bringing two of the most influential families of England together. Henry and Elizabeth went on to have 8 children together in order to cement the longevity of the family rule. Although only Arthur, Henry, Margaret, and Mary Tudor made it to their adult years. Arthur went on to marry Princess Catherine of Aragon, but soon died after Princess Margaret married James Ivatha, which earned her the title of Queen Consort of Scotland. Princess Mary went on to marry the French King Louis XII, and Henry VII became the King of England. As Henry was the second son of the monarchy, he was prepared for a career in the church, but after his 2 other brothers died, he was made king in 159. In fact, he lost his 2 brothers and father in a 7-year period, which is a testament to the short lifespan people had back in those days. Regardless of status, Henry was keen to find a wife and turned to his own brother's widow, Princess Catherine of Aragon, to take up this role. Henry's 36-year rule saw many impactful changes to the country and caused some of the biggest controversies in English history up until that point, the first of which was his change in attitude towards his wife, who failed to give him a minute male heir to the throne after 23 years of marriage. He became so desperate for a male heir, in fact, that he eventually turned his back on the Catholic Church and began his own, the Church of England, with the king. Now able to establish his own marriage and annual rules, Henry allowed himself to remarry so that he could have a son to ensure his legacy remained on the throne. Freedom allowed Henry to have 6 marriages in total, which allowed him to have many children, while only one would be a boy. His son Edward VI was crowned king in 1547, after Henry passed away of tuberculosis in a twist of irony. After all the effort his father put into ensuring the bloodline continues, Edward died just a few years later in 1553, leaving no male heirs to take up the mantle. This death left the Tudor government in chaos, with only his 2 sisters, Mary and Elizabeth, being the only candidates for succession. This was an ideal, as they were both female and had religious views that were not in line with that of the Protestants, the religion that Henry was converting the Catholics to. In fact, it was Edward's devout Catholic half-sister Mary that was the rightful heir to the throne due to her religion. However, Edward named Lady Jane Grey as queen, who was his cousin once removed because she was a Protestant. Mary, however, wasn't going to let her birthright go to another relation. This resulted in Lady Jane only reigning for 9 days before being executed for high treason along with her husband. 2 of his brothers and the former Archbishop of Canterbury, Thomas Cranmer, now with Mary on the throne. The Tudors were once again thrown into chaos as she set about reversing all the work her father and brother did, reverting the primary religion of England back to Catholicism. This change was done aggressively, with the Protestant people now persecuted for being heretics. This led to 300 reverting the primum of England. People who refused to be conformed to Catholicism being burned at the stake. This dark patch in English history is now known as the Marian persecution. Not only were Queen Mary's forceful religious views a problem for people of nobility, but so was her gender, being the first queen, which was earned in her own right. Several of the most influential nobles insisted that she should marry a Protestant man in order to heal the relationship with her people. Mary, who would not be pushed around, chose to marry the Spanish Prince Philip II in 1554. Instead, unfortunately, the pair didn't have any children, despite many attempts. Eventually, Mary named her Protestant half-sister Elizabeth the next heir to the throne. As she lay dying, Elizabeth I had a long reign that spanned 1558 to 1603, in which she did a lot for the country. As the daughter of Anne Boleyn, Elizabeth had to work hard to persuade her people to support her due to her intelligence and likable character. She had a glorious reign With that being said, there were several issues throughout that time, and including her Catholic enemies attempting to murder her, an attack from Rome, and her decision to stay single. Regardless, she faced adversity and earned the nickname Gloriana, Good Queen Bess, and the Virgin Queen when she passed away in 1603, the Tudor period. Before the Tudor era, agriculture played a huge part in the lifestyle of the country, with 90% of the population working on farmland. This was an incredibly hard life that came with a low life expectancy as the age of exploration began. Focus shifted to trade coal, tin, iron, and lead. Mining began to grow exponentially, which made the country incredibly rich. With that being said, famine and poverty was still rife in Tudor England in 1530, however. The cruel laws against beggars were abolished and vagrants were allowed to beg, as long as they had a license. This led to an influx of beggars, which resulted in a new law being passed in 1547, which meant that anyone caught begging would be imprisoned for 2 years in 1550. This law was changed again, with the punishment for the vagrant being a flogging, which meant that they were struck on the back with a whip or rod. The rule of Elizabeth I introduced the Poor Law in 1601, which gave the poor a tax relief as well as other forms of support. It was during this time that the criminal system took a preference to physical punishments rather than being thrown into prison. This included flogging and putting into stocks, which would add humiliation to the punishment. Those who committed the more serious crimes, such as murder, still resulted in execution. The noble and affluent criminals would still be beheaded like previous centuries, while the poor and common population would be hung at the gallows, often with crowds gathering to watch the spectacle. A focus on education came with a Tudor period, with Richard Mulcaster, the educationalist, insisting that a boy's education was the most important, as they were more worthy. This led to boys from wealthy families being sent to grammar school and universities before the Decree. Girls, despite a female monarchy ruling over the country, the future of girls was predetermined to be that of wives and mothers well versed in needlework, cooking, and cleaning. Eventually, girls were given the right to get an education, although it was limited to only reading and writing. Eventually, local schools were established where boys and girls would study together. It was during the Tudor period that leisurely activities began to rise. Many people began playing tennis and football, as well as watching jousting events and gambling. The more affluent of society played chess and gambled, playing card games such as Primo and Naughty, which was the precursor to cribbage. Music applause. After Elizabeth I passed away in 1603, and the reign of the Tudors came to an end. James I became king. James was the son of Mary, Queen of Scots, who had been executed for treason and had become a martyr for the Catholic faith. While many hoped that James would support the Catholic religion, he refused to repeat the same mistakes as Queen Mary by trying to roll back the Reformation. When the Catholics living in England didn't get the support they wanted, a group of people began to plot an assassination. This plan involved blowing up the Houses of Parliament on a day that they knew the king would be present. In 1605, Guy Fawkes and his group of conspirators stored a large volume of gunpowder in a storeroom that was directly below the House of Lords. Unfortunately for the conspirators, the plan was foiled on November 5th, which led to all of the men being hung, drawn, and quartered. This day became known as Bonfire Night. It is celebrated with fireworks every year on November 5th. Despite the assassination attempt, on the whole, James brought peace to the country, joining England and Scotland.